I knew something was off the moment Jenna from HR slid a file across my desk and said, "Just initial this addendum." She smiled like she was handing me gum. I didn't smile back. I never forget things. That's why Bridgepoint Analytics hadn't imploded through 5 pivots and 2 clueless CEOs. Still, I signed, because sometimes you let the game play out before you flip the board. 12 years in, I was the invisible spine of the company, the one who fixed the compliance mess at 2 a.m., who caught errors that could kill deals. My name, Maya Whitaker, was printed on every major contract, including the Solstice Systems merger. My signature was the last domino before $300 million moved. I didn't crave credit. I liked precision, silence, coffee that didn't smell like despair. And I liked that people spoke freely around the woman they assumed was furniture. That morning, I logged into the compliance portal for one last sweep before the big signing, 72 hours away. Everything looked fine on paper, escrow clear, vendor attestations green, all systems humming. Yet something small, one phrase I'd highlighted months ago, buzzed in my brain: substitution and recertification. At 10 a.m., an all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance. Translation? Someone's about to get corporate executed. Victor Hale, our new COO, perfect jawline, hoodie under blazer, walked in talking about modernization and scaling responsibly. 40 minutes of recycled TED Talk optimism. I tuned him out and fixed a data glitch instead. 3 hours later, Jenna returned. No file this time. Just an envelope and backup. 2 HR associates with that "this isn't our choice" look. "Maya, can we talk in the conference room?" "Sure, why not?" They handed me the packet. "Your role no longer aligns with strategic objectives. The standard HR lullaby for 'you're done here.' Return badge, clear desk, severance outlined neatly." Someone had even left a photo of me at reception. "Do not reinstate," scribbled in red. Cute. I didn't cry. Crying gives them a story to post about courageous transitions. I packed my box calmly. Jonah, my assistant, mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded once. Then I left. No scene, no tears. Just silence. At home, I pulled out a battered fireproof box from the back of my closet. Inside, notebooks, flash drives, and one fat folder labeled in my handwriting: contingency, do not open unless terminated. See, I prepare for chaos. 2 years ago, I'd noticed the Solstice merger papers had a head-in tripwire. Clause 11B, termination of named liaison without formal substitution and recertification voids acquisition standing. Translation? Fire me without replacing me, and the entire deal collapses. I didn't invent it. I just remembered it. The execs never read past the first page. They assumed I'd keep the machine running forever. Fine, assume. I opened the compliance registry on my phone, scrolled to my accreditation ID, and hit revoke authorization. One click, no drama, just legal annihilation. Then I made a call. "Solstice Compliance, this is Henry." His tone was cheerful, the way people sound before realizing their life just got complicated. "Henry, it's Maya Whitaker. Bridgepoint terminated my employment this morning. I was the certified liaison on your merger. I revoked my authorization. Until a new liaison is certified, your deal doesn't meet regulatory compliance." Silence. Paper shuffled. Then a quiet, "Wait, you were terminated? That can't be." "It can. And now it's your problem." I hung up, then called Daniel, my lawyer, the only person who actually reads fine print for sport. He laughed once and said, "So they finally did it." "Yep. I'll send the notice." 30 minutes later, he emailed me the notarized statement. "Miss Maya Whitaker is no longer authorized to act on behalf of Bridgepoint Analytics in any capacity." By the time I finished my coffee, the ripples had started. Solstice paused the signing. Escrows froze. Internal calendars cleared. The champagne brunch scheduled for Friday vanished into pending reschedule. An emergency all hands went out. Urgent, realignment and roadmap. Translation, full panic mode. I texted Jonah. Check clause 11B. No emoji. Education is personal. My phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, polite voicemails begging for clarification. I ignored them all. They thought charm could undo a clause. It couldn't. By 8 p.m., the neighborhood was quiet. A lawnmower, a barking dog, the hum of a dying streetlight. Inside, my contingency folder lay open like an exposed secret. I stared at the single printed sentence that now ruled their world. Termination of liaison voids authorization. One sentence, one oversight, and they'd handed me the trigger. I attached Daniel's letter to an email addressed to Solstice Legal. Subject line, formal notice of liaison revocation. Hit send. A soft ding echoed from my laptop. System alert, authorization revocation recorded, timestamp 1916. That was it. 12 years of loyalty reduced to a single irreversible timestamp. I sat there for a long time, tea cooling in my hand, watching the porch light blink in a slow rhythm. Steady, calm, final. Tomorrow, the board would panic, HR would scramble, and someone would realize what they'd actually done. They hadn't just fired an employee, they'd nullified a merger. And me? I had simply followed procedure. So I turned off the lights, let the phone keep ringing, and smiled. Because for once in my life, the system worked exactly as written. By sunrise, my phone looked like a war casualty. 46 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and an email inbox blinking like a Christmas tree on fire. Half of them came from Bridgepoint, the other half from Solstice, and a handful from numbers I didn't recognize. Journalists, probably, or the kind of consultants companies hire when they realize the fire's already reached the curtains. I didn't answer any of them. I made coffee instead. Real coffee, the kind that smells like consequence. I sat at the window, watching the sun slide across the rooftops of Denver, and let the silence stretch just long enough for the caffeine to settle behind my eyes. When you've worked inside a company long enough, you know its hierarchy of panic. First denial, then confusion, then the late-night email that starts with, per our earlier discussion. I was waiting for stage 3 when the first official message hit my inbox. Subject, urgent, clarification on liaison termination. From Victor Hale. Maya, I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding your employment status and the merger liaison certification. Please contact me immediately to resolve this before we proceed with Solstice. Before we proceed. That line made me laugh. Victor still thought this was negotiable, like you could resolve a legally binding clause with the phone call and a Starbucks apology. I stared at his name for a full minute before replying. To Victor Hale. Subject, RE, clarification. There's no misunderstanding. The clause is clear. Termination of the named liaison voids merger authorization pending formal substitution and recertification. You'll need to contact the regulatory board for next steps. Send. 15 minutes later, my lawyer called. Daniel sounded like he was halfway between impressed and horrified. They're scrambling, he said. Solstice froze the escrow. Bridgepoint's board is in emergency session. They're trying to reach you through every channel. I said let them try. They ignored compliance for months. Maybe this will teach them what that word actually means. He chuckled. You really did hold the key, didn't you? Correction, I said, taking a sip of coffee. They gave me the key. I just stopped holding the door open. By noon, Bridgepoint's intranet leaked. Someone, probably Jonah, had ticked a friend at the Denver Ledger. And the headline hit like a thunderclap. Bridgepoint Analytics faces 310 million merger freeze after compliance breach. Sources report termination of certified liaison halted proceedings hours before final signing. Legal teams declined comment. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. LinkedIn thought leaders were writing essays about corporate accountability. Twitter was a mess of hashtags, hashtag Bridgepoint collapse, hashtag clause 11B, and my personal favorite, hashtag HR did it again. I should have been angry, maybe sad, but mostly I felt vindicated. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps, deliberate, expensive. When I opened the door, Victor was standing there wearing the same tailored jacket from yesterday's meeting, but his confidence had evaporated. Behind him was Jenna, clutching a folder like it was a lifeboat. Maya, we need to talk, he said. Tone sharp, but practiced, that executive calm that teach you in MBA school. On my porch? I asked. Bold. Can we come in? I stepped aside, mostly because I wanted to see how far they'd go before the facade cracked. Jenna perched on the couch like she expected me to throw something. Victor didn't sit. He paced. You understand what's happening right now, don't you? This merger's critical. Hundreds of jobs, billions in market cap. 310 million, I corrected, give or take. But sure, jobs, synergy, all that jazz. He glared at me. This isn't funny. No, Victor, it's tragic, I said, leaning back. You fired the one person who could legally finalize your merger. That's not irony, that's negligence. Jenna tried to soften things. Look, Maya, we know things got messy. HR was under a lot of pressure. There were restructuring directives from the top. But if we can reinstate you temporarily. Temporarily? I interrupted, laughing. You think you can just rehire me like a missing password? I don't work for you anymore. And reinstatement after termination doesn't revalidate accreditation. It triggers a re-review process, 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Victor's face went pale. 8 weeks? The Solstice offer expires in 9 days. I sipped my coffee again. Guess you should have read the clause before cutting costs. He exhaled sharply, then tried the charm angle. Maya, you're better than this. You built this merger. Don't burn it down out of spite. I'm not burning anything, I said. I just stepped putting out fires that weren't mine. Silence. The kind that fills rooms like smoke. Jenna shifted uncomfortably. Victor stared at the floor, jaw tight, eyes calculating. Then he muttered something I didn't expect. We can compensate you, he said, generously. Sign off, certify, whatever paperwork you need. We'll call it a consultancy retainer. I tilted my head. You're offering to pay me to undo the consequence of your own incompetence? He nodded once. A clean resolution, no drama. That was the moment I realized they still didn't get it. It wasn't about money. It was about respect. For years, they treated people like replaceable gears in a shiny machine. Now, the machine had jammed because they'd finally removed the wrong gear. You can't buy integrity, Victor, I said quietly, and you definitely can't bribe compliance. He looked like he wanted to yell, but couldn't find a safe word for anger. You'll regret this, he said instead, low and venomous. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. They left. Jenna avoided my eyes. Victor slammed the door harder than he needed to. The silence that followed was pure, clean, the kind of silence you earn. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The news cycle was still spinning. Solstice had issued a statement confirming the procedural hold and mutual commitment to resolution, which in corporate translation meant, we're terrified, but we can't say that publicly. Then I saw the last email of the day, from Jonah. They're blaming Victor. He suspended pending investigation, HR under audit. Legal says Clause 11B was intentionally concealed from the exec summary. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled. Slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that feels like justice finally putting on her shoes. The dominoes were falling exactly as I knew they would. And somewhere, in a glass tower downtown, the people who had laughed at my cautionary notes were finally learning what accountability sounds like. The story wasn't over. Not even close. By the third day, the chaos had matured. What started as whispers and damage control had evolved into a full-blown corporate meltdown. Bridgepoint's PR team was leaking statements faster than they could write them. Solstice's investors were demanding assurances. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I was trending on LinkedIn. Maya Whitaker, the compliance queen who crashed a $310 million merger. Someone had even made a meme of me holding a coffee mug with the caption, "Read the clause, boys." I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be flattered or mildly horrified. By noon, Daniel called again. "You're about to be subpoenaed," he said, almost casually. I paused mid-bite of a sandwich. Subpoenaed? For what? Competence? They're convening a closed session with the board. You'll be asked to provide testimony on the merger halt, specifically your involvement in any potential misconduct. Translation, they're trying to make me the villain before the press does. He sighed. That's usually step 4 in the corporate playbook. If you can't fix it, blame someone with fewer commas in their paycheck. I stared at the skyline outside my window. Downtown Denver shimmered like it was mocking me. Fine, I said. Let them call me in. I've got receipts. The boardroom at Bridgepoint headquarters was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling glass, 12 chairs that cost more than my car, and an aroma of imported wood polish that smelled like money laundering. I walked in wearing a dark green blazer and a calm face. At the far end of the table sat Eleanor Parrish, chair of the board, a woman with the kind of voice that could kill a negotiation in 5 syllables. To her right was Richard Dorr, head of legal, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. And, sitting lower in the hierarchy than usual, was Victor Hale, no longer in his blazer. He looked diminished. "Maya," Eleanor said, steepling her fingers, "thank you for joining us. We'd like to discuss the recent complications surrounding the Solstice merger." "Complications," I echoed. "Interesting word choice." Richard cleared his throat. "We understand there may have been a misinterpretation of Clause 11B. I leaned forward. "No misinterpretation. It's standard regulatory text. You terminate a named liaison without appointing and certifying a replacement, the merger's authorization lapses. It's not ambiguous. It's literally the sentence after the definition." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And you took it upon yourself to inform Solstice of this lapse?" "I took it upon myself to comply with federal law," I said evenly. "If Bridgepoint had wanted silence, they should have retained someone who doesn't understand ethics." That earned me a visible flinch from Victor. He jumped in, voice tight. "You acted maliciously. You could have come to us. You knew what was at stake." I turned to him slowly. "You mean the part where you fired me in a closed-door meeting without transition planning? Or the part where you instructed HR to classify my termination as non-essential role elimination? Because I have that memo, Victor. You signed it." The room went still. Eleanor's pen froze mid-tap. Richard's jaw twitched. "Maya, do you have documentation?" I slid a flash drive across the table. Every approval chain, every compliance log, every timestamp, including your internal communications that reference Clause 11B and the decision to downplay its legal gravity to avoid merger delays. Eleanor's poker face faltered for the briefest moment. "You have access to internal communications?" I shrugged. "Let's just say I archived things properly." Victor exhaled sharply. "You can't leak internal documents. That's theft." "No, it's called retention, something the company handbook recommends when anticipating wrongful termination proceedings." Richard leaned in, whispering something to Eleanor. She nodded slightly, then turned back to me. "Miss Whitaker, what do you want?" It was the first honest question I'd been asked all week. I looked around the table at the suits, the polished faces, the men who thought power was a default setting. "I want acknowledgement. I want you to stop pretending this is about a rogue employee and admit that the company cut corners, fired oversight, and sabotaged its own merger." Eleanor studied me. "And if we don't?" I smiled faintly. "Then I forward my archive to the Federal Trade Commission, Solstice's board, and 3 journalists currently waiting for confirmation." Richard muttered, "That would destroy the company." "Correction, it would expose it." Eleanor leaned back, silent. I could tell she was calculating outcomes, damage control versus public implosion. Finally, she exhaled. "Leave the documents with us. We'll reconvene tomorrow." I stood. "Of course. But for the record," I said, pausing at the door, "I'm not the villain here. I'm the warning sign you all chose to ignore." That night, Jonah called. "They're splitting into factions," he whispered. "Half the board wants to fire Victor to save face. The other half wants to settle with you quietly." "Settle," I said, amused. "I'm not suing them." "He knows. But they're scared you will. There's talk of a payout and NDA." "Of course there is. When you can't own your mistake, you try to buy silence." He hesitated. "You sure you don't want the money, Maya? They're talking 7 figures." I looked out at the city again, lights flickering like distant Morse code. "Money's temporary, but reputation? That's forever." I hung up and opened my laptop. The first email in my inbox was from Solstice Systems Legal. "Miss Whitaker, we reviewed your certification withdrawal and subsequent communication. Please confirm availability for an advisory consultation regarding merger recovery pathways." I smiled. Of course they'd come calling. They needed a fixer, and I'd just become the most valuable one in Denver. The war wasn't just about Bridgepoint anymore. It was about who got to write the ending. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a marble lobby that smelt like new money and fear. Solstice Systems had flown me in under the vague title of Independent Compliance Consultant. The irony wasn't lost on me. 1 week ago, I was the obstacle. Now, I was the solution. A receptionist with perfect posture led me into a glass conference room overlooking the Denver skyline. Waiting inside was Elliot Granger, Solstice's chief legal officer. Late 50s, pinstripe suit, voice like gravel, and Naomi Chen, their VP of corporate strategy, who radiated competence and caffeine in equal measure. Maya, Elliot said, shaking my hand, I appreciate you coming on short notice. We've got a situation. That's one word for it. Bridgepoint collapsing under its own arrogance is another. Naomi cracked a small smile. We like direct people. You'll fit right in. They briefed me fast. Solstice wasn't just pausing the merger, they were preparing to sue. Bridgepoint allegedly concealed a secondary contract, a hidden clause embedded in the original acquisition framework, one that shifted liability for a major data compliance breach entirely onto Solstice once the merger closed. That was the real reason Bridgepoint rushed the signing, not to meet deadlines, but to dump their regulatory rot onto someone else before the auditors found it. Naomi slid a folder toward me. We think you might have seen traces of this ghost contract during your liaison work. It was referenced once, briefly, in an encrypted attachment from Bridgepoint's legal team. Does that sound familiar? My pulse slowed. Oh, it sounded familiar. Months earlier, I'd flagged a buried subfile labeled Annex F, International Holdings Adjustments. It was encrypted, locked, and marked executive access only. I'd noted the anomaly and sent a memo to legal. No one ever replied. Yeah, I saw it, and I flagged it. They ignored it. Elliot leaned forward. If that annex contains what we think it does, falsified foreign audit clearances, shell accounts masking a seven-figure environmental penalty, then Bridgepoint isn't just negligent. They're criminal. That word, criminal, landed like a match in a dry field. Naomi tapped her pen. We want to hire you officially, consultant status, full access to the merger repository. You find that document, authenticated, and confirm Bridgepoint's intent to conceal. We'll handle the rest. I hesitated. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be holding the detonator. But then I thought about Victor, about Jenna's fake sympathy, about the way they tossed 12 years of my work like a disposable coffee cup. Send me the contract. I'll find your ghost. That night, Solstice set me up in a downtown suite with a temporary workstation and encrypted credentials. I spent hours combing through Bridgepoint's archived transfer drives, layer after layer of legal camouflage. Every file had been renamed, hashed, buried under corporate jargon. At 2:34 a.m., I found it. Annex F, redacted copy, buried inside an unrelated budget forecast. My hands trembled as I decrypted it. The contents were worse than expected. Falsified foreign audit clearances, shell accounts masking a seven-figure environmental penalty, a clause reassigning liability to Solstice upon merger completion. It wasn't negligence. It was deliberate fraud. I took screenshots, extracted metadata, and logged everything with timestamp verification. Then I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Bridgepoint had built its empire on manipulation, and now I had the proof that could dismantle it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drafted a memo for Solstice Legal. Document confirms intentional misrepresentation of compliance liabilities. Bridgepoint leadership knowingly withheld data from liaison and federal auditors. Recommend immediate legal action. I hit send. By morning, the headlines had shifted again. Breaking. Solstice Systems initiates legal proceedings against Bridgepoint Analytics. Whistleblower. That's what they were calling me now. At noon, Daniel called again. You just detonated a corporate bomb, he said, half proud, half terrified. Funny, I said. They built the bomb. I just pulled off the duct tape. Then he went quiet. You know they're going to come after you, right? Retaliation, defamation claims, the works. I know, I said. That's why I saved the best part. Which is, I smiled. The emails. In the days before my firing, I'd backed up all internal correspondence tied to the merger. One thread stood out, dated 3 weeks before termination. From Victor Hale to HR Richard Dorr. Subject: expect removal of M. Whitaker. She has flagged the wrong document again. If she keeps digging, Solstice will find Annex F. Remove her before she connects the dots. Termination must be immediate and classified under cost realignment. They hadn't just fired me out of restructuring panic. They fired me because I got too close to the truth. I uploaded that email to Solstice's legal portal with a short caption, "For when they claim ignorance." 2 days later, Bridgepoint's entire executive suite was placed under federal investigation. Trading on their stock froze. Victor's LinkedIn disappeared. Jenna's resigned for personal reasons. And Eleanor, the board chair who thought she could outmaneuver me, issued a statement full of regret and zero accountability. Solstice's lawyers called me instrumental. The media called me the whistleblower who turned corporate politics into poetic justice. But late at night, sitting by my hotel window with the view of the city blinking below, I didn't feel victorious, just empty. You spend years inside a machine, and when you finally break it, you realize it was holding you together too. Still, the truth had to matter to someone. And tomorrow, it would matter a lot more. Because Bridgepoint wasn't done fighting. I'd just exposed their fraud. Next, they'd try to bury me. By the time the subpoenas landed, the gloves were off. Bridgepoint had gone full scorch earth. They released anonymous leaks to the press implying I'd falsified compliance logs, doctored documents, even sabotaged the merger out of personal revenge. A thin, desperate narrative, but desperate people with PR budgets can make desperation look like credibility for about 5 minutes. That's the thing about corporate power. It doesn't crumble gracefully. It claws, it spins, it throws dirt. Daniel called me at 7 a.m. with that tone lawyers use when they're about to ruin your morning gently. Bridgepoint just filed a counterclaim, he said, defamation, breach of confidentiality, and unethical disclosure of proprietary data. I rubbed my eyes. So basically, telling the truth was bad for business. Pretty much, he sighed. They're going to drag your name through every legal form they can find. We'll file for dismissal, but Maya, it's going to get ugly. Ugly was fine. Ugly was honest. By noon, a special report aired on a local business network. Bridgepoint's last attempt at saving face. They painted themselves as victims of a rogue consultant with personal grievances. They even quoted sources claiming I'd been emotionally unstable after termination. That one made me laugh. The oldest corporate trick, gaslight the woman who didn't stay quiet. Still, it stung. Not because it was believable, but because I knew how easily people preferred scandal over truth. That night, I sat in my hotel room, replaying every moment that had led here. 12 years of dedication, of invisible labor, of playing the steady hand while others took the credit. Now I was a headline, a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to call out corruption with a smile instead of a scandal. And then something unexpected happened. Jonah called again. His voice was low, urgent. They're trying to destroy the evidence, Maya. The servers. I just saw an internal memo. Richard ordered IT to scrub all merger communications before the auditors arrive tomorrow. My jaw tightened. So they're still trying to bury it? Not for long if you have what I think you do. Remember that private backup protocol you wrote years ago? The Compliance Redundancy Network? I froze. Of course, the redundancy server, the one mirrored off-site under my credentials, a ghost copy of every compliance log untouched by IT since I'd left. If Bridgepoint wanted to erase their sins, they'd have to pray I'd forgotten my own safeguards. The next morning, I walked into the federal hearing room like someone who had already read the ending of the book. Reporters lined the hall. Bridgepoint's lawyers swarmed near the back, whispering strategy, while Solstice's legal team sat poised and calm. Eleanor was there too. So was Victor. Pale, stiff, eyes darting like a trapped animal. When the hearing began, Bridgepoint's counsel started their show. Our client was victimized by an employee acting outside her duties, misusing confidential access, and I waited for my turn, then placed a small silver drive on the table. This, I said, is the redundancy archive of Bridgepoint's compliance correspondence. Every deleted file, every suppressed memo, every instruction to falsify or conceal, time-stamped, unaltered, and authenticated under my former credentials. Eleanor's face drained of color. Richard looked like someone had replaced his heart with static. I pulled up one email on the projector, the one from Victor. Remove her before she connects the dots. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that ends careers. Then I spoke, not like a whistleblower, not like a victim, like someone who'd had enough. You called me unstable, vindictive, unethical, but the only thing I did wrong was believe that competence protected me. You fired me for doing my job, and then you lied to save your merger. You thought you could rewrite the narrative, but you forgot one thing. Documentation never forgets. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then finally, the lead investigator said, "We've seen enough." Bridgepoint's counsel stammered objections. Victor tried to speak, but Eleanor stopped him with a glance, the kind of glance that meant, "It's over." 3 weeks later, it was official. Bridgepoint's assets were frozen pending investigation. The merger was voided permanently. Victor and Richard were indicted for fraud and obstruction. Jenna took a plea deal for her role in falsifying HR documentation. Eleanor retired, citing health reasons. And me? Solstice offered me a permanent position, Senior Compliance Advisor. A title I didn't need, but one I accepted for the symbolism. The day the final ruling hit the press, I stood outside the courthouse steps. Cameras flashing, microphones everywhere. A reporter shouted, "Maya, do you have anything to say to Bridgepoint?" I smiled, just once, and I said, "Yeah, read the fine print." The crowd erupted. The phrase trended within hours. #read the fine print. A rallying cry for every overworked, undercredited woman in a corporate battlefield pretending to be a meritocracy. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and watched the city lights hum against the glass. The chaos had ended, but the quiet was heavier now, the kind that follows a storm you know you survived, but not unchanged. My inbox buzzed. A new message from Naomi Chen. "We'll need you in D.C. next quarter. Federal Advisory Panel wants your insight on corporate compliance reform." Congratulations, Maya. You didn't just end a merger. You started a movement. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room, "Not revenge. Correction." Because that's what it was in the end. Not spite, not rage. Just the quiet, methodical correction of a system that thought it could silence the wrong woman. And somewhere in a locked boardroom across town, a dozen executives were learning the lesson they'd refused to read. The fine print always wins.